Good. All right, we're gonna start. We're gonna hack right now at 1400. So my name is Senior Airman Dayton Talley. I am a remotely piloted aircraft sensor operator with the United States Air Force and the Texas Air National Guard. Today, our briefing is going to be unclassified. There are far too many of you in this room for me to go through and check all your security clearances. And who's heard of the term? I'd tell you, but I'd have to kill you. Yeah, well, there's too many of you for me to take y'all on. So we're going to keep it unclassed today. So with that, there are some rules of engagement. You are welcome to ask any question under the sun, but I may look at you, give you a cheesy smile, and move right on to the next question. So please feel free to ask any questions you got, and we'll try to keep this fun, keep this interesting. And I know lunch just happened, so my goal is to keep you all awake and keep the heads from nodding. So cool. Today we're going to be covering flying with the Air Force, what that looks like, sensor operators in particular, that's my job, my journey and how I got to where I am. I kind of have an unconventional ping pong type journey where I've been all over the place. The MQ-9 specifically, MQ-9 anatomy, specs on the Reaper itself, and then MQ-9 mission sets. So flying with the Air Force, there are more than just pilots in the Air Force. Some of you might have heard of navigators, flight engineers, but there are actually more than 20 different aircrew positions within the United States Air Force. Within aviators themselves, they're broken down into two main types. You have rated officers, which are going to be your officers, commissioned officers that are aircrew members, and then you're going to have gentlemen and ladies like myself that are career enlisted aviators. A lot of people don't realize that the Air Force has aircrew positions that are enlisted. No college degree required. Right out of high school, you could be flying combat missions, doing all kinds of crazy cool stuff. So we're going to get a little bit more into that. But here are all of the different types of wings that the Air Force has, and a lot of them most people have never seen. So we'll talk a little bit more about these. So talking about officers first, the main one that people think of when they think of a rated officer in the Air Force are pilots, right? So those are the guys who they do 4 years at the academy or they do 4 years on ROTC, what have you, and then they go to pilot training, they drop whatever aircraft it is the Air Force is going to let them fly, and they go on and do their career. The next one that's the most common that people think about are navigators. The Air Force has done away with that term now. We have the term combat systems officers. Navigators are slowly trickling out of the fleet. There's only a few aircraft left that still have navigators on board, but we have other roles that they serve. Combat systems officers serve, weapons systems officers, electronic warfare officers, et cetera, et cetera. They all fall under the same career field. After that, you have air battle managers. These guys are flying on airborne command and control aircraft, the ones with the big radar dish on top, and they are maintaining the battle space using those high-fidelity radars and other intelligence systems to direct aircraft, make us aware of surface-to-air missile threats that come alive in the battle space, things of that nature. Flight medicine, these are going to be your flight docs and your flight nurses. These guys, not only do they treat us flyers, when you become a flyer in the Air Force, you're restricted on your medical. You can only go through flight medicine for any kind of treatment. You have to have a specifically trained aerospace physiology flight doc that you can go to, so they're the only ones who can operate on you, give you, whatever kind of prescription medications you need, treatments for any injuries, that kind of stuff. But then they also perform the aeromedical evacuation mission. So these are the big cargo aircraft that they convert to an airborne emergency room, and they'll fly to places like Haiti, the Middle East, any South American countries that are affected by any large earthquakes, things of that nature. So flight medicine. And then one of the more unique career fields that's very applicable to me are RPA pilots. So the Air Force decided that flying remotely piloted aircraft, particularly the MQ-9 and the RQ-4, is so unique that our pilots don't have to go through regular pilot training. We have our own training pipeline. So it's kind of a weird system. We have pilots who go through the regular pilot training pipeline, and then they cross-train to us from whatever airframe they've flown previously. But then we also have specific RPA-only pilots that are only authorized to fly the MQ-9 and the RQ-4. So that's what the RPA pilots are, and they have a different set of wings. Then, on the enlisted side of the house, which is what I am, we have career enlisted aviators. Less than 1% of the Air Force are career enlisted aviators. We are the primary warfighting branch of the Air Force. We're the ones going into combat, doing those kinds of missions, those kinds of things. So some examples you might have heard of before, boom operators. These are the guys doing in-air refueling. They're flying on the back of any of the KC-type aircraft, giving that in-air refueling to our fighters, our bombers, and our other mobility aircraft in-air. Really cool job. They get to... When they're in the middle of in-air refueling, they are in charge of both aircraft. So you'll have an 18-year-old airman first class, fresh out of high school, who's controlling a KC-135 and a C-17, or a KC-135 and an A-10, whatever aircraft. They are telling both pilots exactly how to position themselves. So really high stress, high responsibility job. Flight engineers, I'm going to assume most of you know what flight engineers are. That's actually an enlisted job in the Air Force. Again, those are going away as aircraft become more and more advanced and digital avionics become the standard within the fleet. So it's typically only the older aircraft that still have flight engineers, but they are still out there. Mission systems specialists, these are the guys flying on the large C2 type airborne platforms, the AWACS, the JSTARS, things of that nature, the new wedge tail, and they're working with the air battle managers in order to operate those airborne ISR systems. Then you have airborne ISR operators. These are the guys taking in signals intelligence, taking in image intelligence. Also, our airborne linguists fall into this. So they're translating and they're processing data real time in the battle space and giving it to the ground commander, the ground forces commander, or back to the Pentagon, the White House, wherever that information needs to go, depending on the level of severity of whatever it is they intercept. Special Missions Aviators, this is a new name for a job that's been around for a long time. It originally started as the tail gunners on bombers back in World War II. Then we got rid of the majority of tail gunners. Now we really don't have any gunners on most fixed-wing aircraft. Now we have them on helicopters, so the door gunners, they fall under the Special Missions Aviator. They mainly work with pararescue and special operations forces. Loadmasters, exactly what it sounds like. They're working on big carrier aircraft, loading and unloading, doing airdrops, making sure passengers are safe in flight, that kind of stuff. And then my job as a sensor operator, we're the newest career field to the career enlisted aviator. For a long time, we weren't considered career enlisted aviators. And I'll make a joke about that later. So this is relatively new. So we do get flight pay. We do get flight suits. We are fully integrated within the career enlisted aviator community. That's relatively new, seeing as we never leave the ground. We'll talk a little more about that in a second. So sensor operator specifically. So this is my bread and butter. I think it's the best job in the Air Force. So the short-term answer that comes right from airforce.com is we are responsible for the operation of airborne sensors and terminal guidance systems. So what does that mean? So airborne sensors, we have what we call the pod, the ball, the MTS. There are all kinds of names for it. But its full name is the multispectral targeting system developed by Raytheon. It's got all kinds of cool specs. We have a whole slide dedicated to that in a little bit. We also have a couple other sensors on board. We'll talk about those in a little bit. But that is a very, very small percentage of what we do. Commonly, it's joked that we're a poor man's navigator, seeing as we don't have any college experience, but we are a fully integrated member of the crew. And later, I'll show you a picture of the cockpit. We sit right next to the pilot, and we are fully involved in every decision. We're backing our pilot up. Short story as an example, I was flying in country and we are conducting what's called NBO, near border operations. So we're in one country, not allowed to cross a border, so we have to get clearance from the Air Force to fly close to that border because we have to be very, very aware that that border is there so we don't cross it and cause an international incident. My pilot had a loiter set up, so the autopilot is on, flying a circle as we're looking at our target, and all of a sudden I notice that the target is getting smaller and smaller and smaller in our screen. So what's that mean? It means we're moving away from it. So I look up at one of our auxiliary displays to where our aircraft is located, and we are making a beeline directly for that airspace border, which would have been a call to the president in that situation. That would have been a very, very bad situation. So I notified the pilot. He made an immediate hard left bank. We turned around, salvaged the situation. But we are fully integrated members of the crew in all aspects. So just controlling the sensors is a very small part of what we do. And then the terminal guidance system built into the MTS is a Class 4 laser. It's a target designator, so it fires at a pulse, and then our missile systems and our bombs can pick up that pulse. So the pilot is responsible for giving consent for the missile to come off the rails or for the bomb to drop off the rails. And once it's gone, it's all me. I am controlling that missile, that bomb in flight. If something happens and we have to call what's called a shift, which is where I immediately have to come off target because, let's say, a child walked in or a group of people, or one of the things we love to say in training is a bus full of nuns came out of nowhere, we have to shift. And so that's my responsibility. So if that missile, once it's in flight, doesn't hit its target, that's on me. And so that's a huge responsibility, considering the fact that minimum qualification is 17 in a high school education. So it's pretty cool. So what's training look like for someone in my job? So we have a ridiculous amount of training. Your tax dollars fund all of this, so thanks for sending me to school. Appreciate y'all. So first starts with basic military training, like every airman, 8.5 weeks at wonderful Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. It's hot, it's humid, it's sticky, it's nasty, very similar weather to what we have here, but it's a fun little summer camp. From there, we move on to aircrew fundamentals. Every enlisted aviator has to go through aircrew fundamentals. It's a week to 2 weeks long at San Antonio, so it's kind of funny. You'll see the guys who dropped aircrew right out of basic training. They don't even get to leave Lackland. They pick up their bags and they walk across the street to the aircrew training dorms and they drop their bags off. So that's kind of fun. So we spend a week there learning basics about aviation. Some of these guys have never seen an airplane before, so they talk about anatomy of aircraft, basics of aircraft operation, kind of get people the basics for the lingo. From there, we go to our basic course. So every enlisted aviator career field has their own basic course. So we go to basic sensor operator course, or BSOC, as we call it. at Randolph, and we spent 2 months there, and that's where we learn everything about the MQ-9. It's all purely academics. There's no hands-on with the aircraft at this point. We're just getting drilled with knowledge checks. It's a highly academic intensive situation. I had gone to college before I enlisted. I did a couple of years in college, and that was the most intense academic program I've ever gone to. I was like drinking from a fire hose. No, it's like drinking from a waterfall. It was a lot of information. From there, we actually get to start flying. So after we graduate BSOC, when we get our wings, we go to MQ-9 initial qualification training. These are held at 3 different locations throughout the United States, one in California, one in New Mexico, one in New York. And we spent about 4 months there, weather dependent, and that's where we actually start flying. That's where we get our combat training. We start learning how to sling missiles. We start learning how to drop bombs, doing all of our different missile sets. So that's 16 weeks there. From there, we finally go home, back to our home unit, whatever unit we get assigned to. There's all kinds of places all over the United States that have MQ-9s. There are 4 active duty bases, and then there are 11 National Guard bases that run MQ-9 operations. So you could go to a lot of different places. And then you'll do your mission qualification training. Each unit has their own specific mission that they conduct, and so that's where you get your mission-specific training from your unit, hosted in-house with in-house instructors. So here's some pictures of me going through training. Top right, it's a little example there of how tired I was. You're doing 12-hour days, flying, academics, studying, prepping for the next ride. So that is inside the cockpit of one of our ground control stations. That's our cockpit, GCS. So I'm pretty tired there. Just finished up a sortie. Next to me in the other picture there, that is me and some of my teammates standing in front of one of the training MQ-9s at the schoolhouse. So these are all other sensor operators that I went through the entire pipeline with, really good friends of mine. I still keep in contact with them to this day. And then the bottom picture is one of the proudest moments of my life outside of getting married, and that's getting the wings pinned on my chest. So that was a very proud moment. And the gentleman pinning me, that is the gentleman who hired me to do this job. So it's kind of a cool full circle thing. So how did I get here? My journey is a little bit different. I kind of ping-ponged all over the place. So I got my start with the Air Force and Civil Air Patrol. If you've never heard of Civil Air Patrol, they're in the far hangar. There's a booth over there. Please feel free to stop by them. A wonderful organization. Cannot stress enough how much that set me up to be an aviator, to be a successful young man, networking, everything. I love Civil Air Patrol to death. From there, I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. I applied. My math grades weren't good enough, so they told me, head to a prep school, and then after that, we'll let you in because you'll get your math grades up in the prep school. So I said, great, let's go. And then I got really sick to the point to where I needed to be hospitalized. So pulled out of that, reevaluated. I could have kept applying, but at that point, I had taken so many years to try to figure that out that I was delaying my progress in life. And the academy is great, but you got to move on at some point. So I bumped around in college trying to figure out what I was going to do, wasn't really sure. And then I decided I wanted to be a police officer. So I got hired with the city of Upland back in California. I went to the police academy, and then I blew my right knee out in training. Just on crutches for 6 months, physical therapy, rigorous. It was miserable. From there, I healed up, and then a lot of situations started happening with law enforcement. I decided that was a good time for me to punch out and pull chocks. Didn't really want to be a beat cop anymore. So I enlisted in the California Air National Guard. I did 2 years there. Worked the firefighting missions. For those of you who've seen the crazy wildfires, they use MQ-9s in California. They use our infrared cameras to real-time detect where the fires are moving, and they relay that information to ground crews so they can better stop the fires and reposition resources. So I did that mission for 2 years. I worked the COVID mission, dispatching our medical resources all over the state of California, doing treatment, testing, that kind of stuff. After 2 years of doing that, this job opened up. I didn't have this job in California. I knew this is what I wanted to do, so I transferred here to Texas to get this job, went through training. My wife and I got married around that time, bought a house here. Rest is history. So there's a picture of my law enforcement uniform from the academy, and then my basic training graduation photo. So. All right, let's talk about the Reaper now, my baby, my pride and joy. So the General Atomics MQ-9 Reaper is employed primarily as an intelligence collection asset and secondarily against the dynamic execution of targets. So what does that mean? So the MQ-9 is really, really good at going slow, and it's got a really small profile, so it's really hard to see, and it's not jet powered, so the engine's super quiet. So the reason that we're liked so much by ground forces commanders overseas is that we are always on station. The number given by General Atomics is at any given time, 24 hours a day, there are at least 60 different General Atomics MQ platform aircraft in the air, in combat, in theater. So it's really great for the ground forces commander because if something pops off, they don't have to call for an A-10, call for an F-16, call for an AC-130, and then wait for that crew to get to the aircraft, spin the aircraft up, take off, and then transit to wherever they're at. odds are there's an MQ-9 doing something nearby. They can check on station within 5 minutes and be putting suppressive fire down and helping our troops out. So that's a really big mission that we do. Secondarily is the dynamic execution of targets. This is where we became famous. In the global war on terror, both in Afghanistan and Iraq, we had what we called the hunter-killer mission. So we would spend months at a time monitoring different leaders within ISIS and within the Taliban, and we would watch them develop what we call patterns of life, POL, and then eventually, when it became safe to do so based on their patterns that we had developed over months of watching these targets, we would get a strike order typically from the White House or from the Pentagon, and then we would remove that person from the face of the earth. So kind of interesting there. Cool. So how big is the Reaper? A lot of people don't realize how big these aircraft are. You can kind of see there's a little tiny person there. That's for reference. So the top of the dome stands at about 7.7 feet tall. The wingspan, tip to tip, is 86 feet. And then nose to tail, we're looking right at about, let's see, where's that number? There you go, 36.2. So it's a decent size. It's got about the same profile as an A-10 Warthog. We have the same takeoff and standard combat loadout as an F-16, minus the air-to-air missiles. We aren't air-to-air capable. Yeah, we can take off with the same amount of munitions, the same amount of information. The only thing we are restricted from that we cannot do is in-air refueling, which begs the question, how long can an MQ-9 hang out in the air? So we'll get to that in a second. I'm getting ahead of myself. The anatomy of an MQ-9, we have two main onboard sensors that we use. We talked about the multispectral targeting system a little bit. We also have a synthetic aperture radar. So this is a new technology that they use where they sweep the radar like an arm kind of picking up information. So as you can see here, this is an image from a synthetic aperture radar. Can anybody tell me where that is? That's a Capitol building. Yeah, Capitol building in DC. So that was taken with a SAR image. So we can use this technology to do moving target indicators. We can use it to take SAR images like this, and we can get these really high fidelity 3D images. And we actually, each one of those white dots you see is a data point. So we can develop 3D images. So let's say we're watching an adversary target build some kind of facility or dig out something. We can use the synthetic aperture radar in order to determine the heights, different kinds of information about them. So we get some really good data from the SAR. And then the multispectral targeting system is the pod, the ball. And we'll get exactly into what is entailed in that in a second. So the MTS, the ball, the pod, got all kinds of different names. This is primarily what I control. So when we get to my cockpit, the joystick and the levers that are all there are all designed for me to control and manipulate this system. So it's a high altitude, long range infrared and visible imagery. So we can see both into the IR spectrum and into the visible spectrum. We call the visible spectrum day TV, DTV. That's the common name for it within the community. We also have a spot tracker, so we can go into a particular range with an infrared and we can see other units targeting lasers, and then we can adjust the systems in order to pick out exactly which targeting laser is coming from which aircraft. So if you're working with multiple aircraft on a strike, let's say we're doing a coordinated strike on a compound, you can see exactly who is aiming at what in order to better coordinate to make sure you don't have two aircraft on the same target. Or if you want all the aircraft on the same target, to make sure everybody's looking at the same thing. Image fusion, we can blend IR and day TV, and then you might ask yourself, well, what's the purpose of blending a non-visible spectrum with a visible spectrum? The day TV camera is really susceptible to shadows. It's hard to see people hiding in the shadows because it only picks up the visible light from miles and miles and miles away. So we can add in day TV in order to see heat signatures in the shadows. So if people are hanging out under the shadow of a tree, in the shadow of a building, sometimes even inside of buildings, we can use that infrared just a little bit, bump it up, and it makes them stand out and glow. So it gives us a lot of capabilities there. I already talked about the targeting laser a little bit. It's a class 4 laser. This is definitely like, if you were close enough to it, it's cancer providing, blinding. It itself is considered a weapon system. In order for me to turn it on, I have to have clearance from the pilot, the officer, because we're taking liability for anything at the ground that we're hitting with that. We train out at the Edwards Test Range in California, and one of the things we have to do before we turn it on is we have to sweep the area for the endangered desert tortoise because they don't want our laser affecting the tortoises in the area. Kind of interesting. Then we have a different laser that's a laser rangefinder. So this laser sends laser energy down from the aircraft to the ground and then picks up those returns as it comes back. It has a timing formula inside of it, and it can determine very accurately exactly the distance from the aircraft to that target on the ground. So that's a system that we'll use in order to better calibrate our GPS, distance to target, all kinds of stuff. We use it for targeting solutions. And then one of the final cool things that we have is we have a IR illuminator. So when our special operations forces are on the ground, let's say we're dealing with Navy SEALs or Green Berets or whoever we're working with that day, and we're overhead doing Overwatch, and we see a bad guy run out of the target building and hide in some bushes, and the Navy SEALs just can't quite figure out where he's at, I can turn on our spotlight, and boom, it's like a beam of God coming down from the sky, completely in infrared. You cannot see it with the naked eye, but of course, all of our guys have infrared goggles that can see within that spectrum, and so it's like pointing it out to them. Yep, there you go. There's a bad guy, and then okay, we've got it. We call the thing I like for that, the code word for that is it's called Sparkle. So they'll request Sparkle, and then they'll request see Sparkle. So that's another fun tool that we have. So there's a picture of the MQ-9 next to a person for scale. So those are not tiny people, tiny maintainers. Those are full-size grown men. So this is a very large aircraft. For example, the missiles that you see on both wings, those are 250 pounds each. Those are Hellfire missiles, so all over the news all the time. Those are originally designed to fire from helicopters in Vietnam, and then we retrofitted them, and now we have fired more Hellfire helicopter-fired missiles from MQ-9s than helicopters have ever fired. So it's definitely been heavily adapted for our airframe, and there are now versions and variants of it that wouldn't even work on a helicopter because they're designed and set up for shooting from an orbit, 25,000 to 30,000 feet. So, all right, here's the boring slide. I am going to put this in perspective, so I just wanted to throw some stats out there because I know there are some numbers nerds in the room. I see a couple of you. I know who you are. So how much does the MQ-9 weigh? So it's 4,900 pounds empty. So that's no fuel, no external pods, no external weight, nothing. Empty weight with just the basic configuration, 4,900 pounds. Maximum takeoff weight, there are two different variants. We have a normal variant and an extended range variant. In theater, we only fly the extended range variant, so I don't know why they put the normal variant information out there, so I only have the extended range version listed. But we have 11,700 pounds takeoff weight. So as you can see, based on the empty weight versus the takeoff weight, we can carry a lot of additional stuff on top of our aircraft. We have a lot of room to play with fuel tanks, additional pods, weapons, that kind of stuff. Fuel capacity, we have 6,000 pounds of fuel. A decent amount of that is internal. We have 7 internal fuel tanks. Nice thing about not needing any life support systems or room for a pilot is you can put a big old fuel bladder right there. So we have 7 internal fuel tanks, and then we have the capability to have 2 external fuel tanks, but they've actually found that based on the power that the aircraft generates and the induced drag from that external fuel tank, we get less range with 2 full fuel tanks than we do with 1. So kind of interesting. Max speed, 240 knots. That I have never seen us go that fast. That's like full throttle, nothing on it. Like you are max performing that MQ-9, which the MQ-9 is a glorified glider. So I always get kind of confused when people talk about max performing it. I'm like, why would you want to max perform a glider? It doesn't make any sense to me, but range, 1,611 miles. So what does that mean in terms of hours? As we know in the aviation community, we're always looking at things from hours because miles really doesn't matter because wind affects that, altitude affects that, performance index of the aircraft affects that. So what does the timeline look like? So at my unit here, I fly from here to Ellington. We have 3 shifts. We have a day shift, a swing shift, and a night shift. We're all 9-hour shifts. I have come on shift, flown a full 8-hour shift with an aircraft, handed off to the 2 other shifts, gone home, done my 12 hours of crew rest, slept, gone back on shift, and that same MQ-9 is still in the air, still on target, still flying, performing the mission. So we are a literal 24-hour operation flying 7 days a week, every day. Your United States Air Force is operating MQ-9s in country, watching backs of our guys and friendly forces. So we are the persistent eye in the sky. Service ceiling, we can go up to 50,000 feet. The MQ-9 in this variant has no de-icing capabilities, so we typically don't fly that high. We're hovering right around 22,000 to 30,000. That's our typical operating altitude. Of course, it depends on the country. If you're flying in a very mountainous country like Afghanistan, you're going to adjust higher to make room for terrain. In a flatter country like Iraq, you can come down a little farther. It all depends. Also depends on the target. We have what we call detection concerns. So if you're on a really high-profile target and you want to make sure that they have no clue that you're there, you're going to fly higher in order to mitigate the effects of the noise and the visual of the aircraft. How much does it cost to operate us per hour? So we're looking at about $3,500 per hour operating cost, which, as far as military aircraft go, is insanely cheap. It's one of the reasons why we have taken over the scene when it comes to ISR. We are just so much cheaper than anything else. On my next slide, I have a comparison with the F-16. Price per aircraft, it's kind of hard to determine this. Our aircraft are sold in units of 4. The Air Force buys 4 aircraft and 1 ground control station, so it's hard to break it out because then you're like dividing the ground control station by 4, which isn't physically possible because you need it. But roughly $32 million per aircraft. This is fully loaded with the aircraft, the multi-spectral targeting system, which is the most expensive single component. That is $11 million on its own, just that little pod with all the cameras inside of it. Any other internal sensors, avionics, all that good stuff. So about $32 million per aircraft. So what do these numbers mean in real life? So 4,900 pounds empty weight is the equivalent of a Toyota Prius and a full-grown bull moose. Put that in perspective for you there. So the MQ-9 costs about $3,500 per hour, and F-16 is $8,000 minimum. They burn a ridiculous amount of fuel. And that doesn't factor in the fact that whenever you deploy fighters, you always have to have a tanker flying with them to refuel them. They pretty much the standard tactic now is they do not scramble fighters without additionally scrambling at least 1 tanker to be there as support for them. So that's not factored into that at all. MQ-9 costs $32 million. F-16s, the current block with all the new fancy avionics, integrated avionics, all that good stuff, is running about $63 million. And then with our aircraft, there are little to no human risk factors. So if it's happened a couple of times, you've probably seen it in the news, when an MQ-9 gets downed, the only negative thing that happens to the pilots is they have to go do a urinalysis and a blood test. So that's a lot better than becoming a prisoner of war or, God forbid, dying in the crash. So significantly less risk to human life. So how do operations work? How do we fly these MQ-9s? It's a little confusing, so I'm going to try to break this down for you, but we do what's called remote split operations. So here at Ellington Field, we have an MQ-9 operation. We fly combat. Literally 2 days ago, I was flying on mid-shifts. It's middle of the night. I was flying combat in country overseas. I got off shift, and then I was hanging out with these guys who came in to visit me for this weekend. So you literally are in combat, and then you go home. I've been flying 2 years now, and every day I've gone to work, I have been in combat in theater. There's no other job in the world that gets you that kind of capabilities. So that is called the mission control element. So all of our mission control elements, MCE crews, are here stateside. They're at one of the 11 National Guard bases or the 4 active duty bases. So we do all of our actual mission work from here in the United States. Our launch and recovery elements are the guys who actually take off and land the plane. Begs the question, why do we need 2 separate elements? Why can't the mission control guys launch and recover the plane? Why do we need 2 separate crews? And that's because of the KU SATCOM control that we use for these aircraft. So the big dome that you see, the hump, which is where the pilot would sit, has an antenna inside of it that is aligned with a geosynchronous satellite. And we use high-speed internet connection in order to give an uplink and a downlink to the aircraft. It has a roughly 1.7 to 2.2 second delay on the aircraft. So when I put a stick input in, 1, 2, and then the aircraft will pan left. Stop, 1, 2, and then the aircraft stops. Think about how crazy that would be to try to land an aircraft the size of an A-10 with a 2-second delay. You're going to crash that bad boy every time. So the answer to that is our line of sight, which is radio frequency. Our line of sight launch and recovery guys are the ones actually responsible for taking off and landing the plane. These guys deploy in country to our launch and recovery bases in the Middle East, in the Asian Pacific Theater, in Europe, and all they're doing all day is they're taking control of an aircraft. We do a handover, so we set up the aircraft exactly like they need it, and they press a button, and then boom, they take control of the aircraft, and then they land it. And then they'll take control of an aircraft on the ground, and they'll take it off. And that's all those guys do all day. They're just taking off and landing aircraft, getting them up to a pattern altitude, and then they're running with it. So the new thing, though, is we're moving away from that because that still has a human life risk factor, right? So even though those guys never leave the wire, they stay on base in whatever country they're in, there's still a potential in certain areas of the world that that base could come under attack. Actually, one of my friends was in country when a certain bad guy was lobbing mortars at one of our bases, and they had to shelter for cover. So we're moving to this new system. It's being tested. I've actually had the privilege to do this real world in country. It's called ATLC, Automatic Takeoff and Landing Configuration. This allows us to press a button and the plane lands itself, and it's horrifying and awesome at the same time. This aircraft has such good software, it will land better than any human pilot I've ever seen. It'll land consistently, perfectly every single time. It's spooky. So that's the new thing that's out right now. What this does is it allows us to have no launch and recovery guys in theater. The Air Force's goal is to only have maintenance guys in country. You will never have aircrew members in country. All of our aircrew members will stay right here in the safety of the United States. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so the question was regarding weather information and all that kind of stuff that comes into the aircraft, telemetry, stuff like that. So we have some onboard sensors. The MQ-9 is triple redundant, so every sensor we have has 3 backups. We do not get real-time weather data. We have, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, we have weather information on station that provides that to us. So there are limits to the winds and things that this ATLC can land in that a human could. So that's why, as they're developing the software, it's really restrictive right now because they essentially only want us to do it in perfect optimal conditions. As the software, we've been told that as the software gets better, it'll be able to land in adverse conditions, and then eventually what's coming is the aircraft will be able to land with an active emergency procedure. So it'll be able to land itself with an engine out, engine fire, a loss of control, anything. The software it's all coming. But right now, it's brand new software. I've only done 1 landing, real world in theater, and it is it has to be perfect outside, perfect day. But yeah, did I answer your question? Perfect. Okay. So this is the cockpit. This is a ground control station. So this is where I live. So pilots sit left side, sensor operators sit right side. And so that's a whole lot of data you're taking in. I always kind of chuckle when people say, oh, so it's like a video game. I'm like, that's a video game with 7 screens and the consequences are going to federal prison if you mess up. But yeah, it's a video game. So I'll break it down a little bit for you here, what we're looking at. So in the center row of screens on each side, that is our actual console. That is what is communicating with the aircraft. When we put inputs into those inputs go directly to the aircraft. Top screen is called the tracker display. That is our real-time GPS map. We have all of the aviation charts, and we can zoom in at different zoom levels, and it changes the chart based on how zoomed in or zoomed out we are. So real-time data on where the aircraft is and where the sensor is looking. Next, down below that, we have the heads-up display. So that's what's actually receiving the camera feed. So the sensor side, you can see it looks a little different than the pilot side. The sensor side is what's looking at the ground. It has all the necessary targeting information, things of that nature that would be relative to the sensor operator. And then on the left side, the pilot has all the flying telemetry. It's super weird. I don't know how they do it, but the pilots are actually trained to ignore the camera behind them because the camera could be looking behind you and the telemetry could be showing you going straight. So you have to ignore the camera feed. They just look at what we call the green goo. It's all the green telemetry data that's on the camera. They ignore the camera feed behind it. Really interesting. Down below is our heads down display. So that is where all of our information, all of our readouts from the aircraft come. For those of you who don't know, General Atomics was, as it sounds, a nuclear power company before they decided to get into the RPA world. So they didn't have any flight engineers, any aviation engineers on staff. If they did a terrible job. So this system, all of the readouts are given with data, with bits. So you have to memorize all kinds of numbers for the aircraft because everything is given to you in percentages, in numbers. We're just now starting to get to the point to where we have green, red, yellow, dials, things that are a lot easier to look at a moment's notice. There are also, you can see it's broken down here, 2 gray sections of data. There are over 100 different data cards that you can look at, pulling all kinds of information from the aircraft. We have no feedback from the aircraft, so the only way we can tell what the plane is doing is by these numbers. So we have different screens for everything, and all of that is coming from sensors that are inside of the aircraft. And then below that, we have the actual console. So the pilot side is set up with the speed lever, throttle, flaps, all that, and then the right side is a joystick that actually controls the aircraft. On my side, the big speed lever is actually my zoom lever for moving in and out with the camera, and then the right side, the joystick, controls the panning and slew controls on the aircraft. Auxiliary displays we have set up. On the left and right, these can be hooked up to all kinds of computers controlling additional sensor packages that we have strapped on under the wings. We have what's called internet relay chat that we use. It's on our secret level system called SIPR. It's a secret level computer system that's military wide, and we have a AOL chat room essentially with every other Air Force aircraft in theater, so we can talk immediately back and forth. We can talk with our mission people. We can talk with whatever 3-letter agency, Alphabet Soup, is controlling our mission that day. It's all done by internet relay chat. So that is usually on our right-hand side, and then other auxiliary displays showing relevant map information. We can put more of the information tables up on those auxiliary displays, so we can have more than just 2. It's all mission-dependent, the configuration of the auxiliary displays. So the only standard is the center row, the actual rack itself. So crew complement, what does flying an MQ-9 take? So we've talked a lot about the pilot. We've talked a lot about the sensor operator. From there, locally, we also have mission intelligence coordinators. So these are intel troops that are specifically trained to back us up on our airborne missions. So what I like to think of them like is, who likes comic books? A couple people like comic books. So every superhero's got a man in the chair, right? Giving them data, giving them information. That's what the MICs, the mission intelligence coordinator, that's what the MICs do for us. So they're pulling up maps, they're communicating with outside agencies, they're talking with our 3-letter agency, that's our customer. They're just doing whatever we need them to do because we've got a handful of aircraft that we're controlling at that time. Next, we have RPA comms. So these are our communications guys. These guys are handling our data links. These guys are handling our secret level computers, our top secret level computers, any additional systems we have, any additional sensor pods. They are our comm guys that are all read into the same programs that we're read into, so they can troubleshoot anything for us. The joke, for those of you who aren't veterans, who aren't in the Air Force, air crew has a hard time reading, let alone getting out of bed, so we need the techs to come and fix stuff for us because we're not very good at it. So. Then we have RPA maintenance. So these are the guys that actually will come in and fix the ground control station when we inevitably break it. I think in my career, flying in 2 years, I've broken 3 GCSs. So our favorite game to play is what's the most expensive thing you've ever broken. I'm sitting right now at about 11 million is the most expensive thing I've ever broken. So our RPA maintenance guys really do a lot of the labor in order to make it work for us. And then, of course, we have RPA weather. So these are the guys, again, they're read into the same programs that we are. They know where we're flying. They are giving us our weather brief every day before we step to the aircraft. And they're looking in theater, looking at local weather, Air Force weather, satellites, all that good stuff, and they give us our weather briefing. So this is just the local crew. So what missions does the MQ-9 do? So we talked a little bit about ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. That is the bread and butter mission of the MQ-9. Full motion video and persistent ISR. What some people don't know is they ask why we have the Global Hawk and the MQ-9. Why do we have both? The Global Hawk is only set up to take still photos. The MQ-9 does full motion video. So when a combatant commander wants real-time, eyes-on video footage, they call it an MQ-9. If they're looking for high altitude reconnaissance, photos, that kind of things, they call it Global Hawk RQ-4. And then persistent ISR, I've already talked about. We are always on station. There's an MQ-9 overhead all the time, constantly. The secondary mission that we performed that we got really famous for in the Middle East was close air support. We are not the best CAS asset, the close air support CAS. That definitely goes to our brothers in the A-10 Warthog and the AC-130 gunship. Those guys are amazing at what they do. The only claim to fame we have is that, like I said, we're always on station. So let's say we got troops in contact. We have Marines that are pinned down, taking fire from ISIS, taking fire from whoever they're fighting. There's an MQ-9 nearby. They can start slinging hellfires and suppressing those and saving lives on the ground right away. So that's where we really came in and got control of the close air support community because we're just always there. You know, the fastest tool in that situation is going to be the best tool. Strike coordination and reconnaissance. So this is a phase of warfare. This is the second phase of like an invasion type warfare. So once our really expensive, fast-moving fighter jets go in and shut down all the surface-to-air missile systems in a country, then we have SCAR. That's when you send in the slower-moving guys like us, and we start taking care of tertiary targets, command and control nodes, bridges, infrastructure, manufacturing capabilities that would prolong the war, things like that. So we're really good at that because we're really good at looking for targets, correlating that target, and then blowing it up right there because we're always on station. One that really surprises people is combat search and rescue, and it's for the same reason that we're really good at close air support. If an aircraft goes down in theater, you want someone overhead immediately protecting them from being picked up by the bad guys and becoming a prisoner of war. So there's always an MQ-9 nearby that can immediately stop what they're doing. Combat search and rescue is the #1 priority in theater. I have never seen any other mission take precedent over a downed-air crew member. So we will leave whatever mission we're doing. We'll establish a pattern overhead of the downed survivor, and then we'll instantly start doing scans to protect them. Anybody who gets close to them is getting smoked. Doesn't matter. We're protecting our guy. We're not going to let them fall into enemy hands as much as we can. And then we wait for the A-10s to check on station and the PJs to check on station, and then they take it from there. But 9 times out of 10, when a combat search and rescue mission pops off, MQ-9 is going to be on station first, taking control of that situation and protecting our men and women who are now stranded on the ground. Our newest mission that we're still developing tactics about is air operations in maritime surface warfare. So this is airplanes versus boats. So we're looking for boats, we're looking for bad guys, drug smugglers, things of that nature. And we're still developing tactics and techniques on this because typically we've been flying in the desert. And so now we're starting to operate more maritime environments, South China Sea, Gulf of Oman, areas like that. So we're trying to figure out how to best utilize our onboard sensors for that mission. So summary, we talked about flying with the Air Force, sensor operators, my journey, the MQ-9, MQ-9 anatomy, Reaper specs, and MQ-9 missions. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Getting the Reaper on theater, do you put them in like ships and then get them to that point, or are you flying from the U.S. over to those locations?
That's a great question. So he wanted to know how we get our MQ-9s from where they're manufactured stateside overseas to flying in theater. So we have essentially a specialized Connex box called a coffin. That's the nickname we have for it. It's it's like 6.5 feet tall and probably 30-something feet long. And so we take the wings off, take the horizontal rudder vaders off, and then we stuff them all into a big box and we ship it overseas. So they'll go on the back. We just did a contingent. I don't know if those of you who keep up with the the news, but Air Defender in Europe was a big exercise they just did. Our local unit supported that, so we sent a couple of MQ-9s over there in a box. They flew in the back of C-17s. Yes.
So, just for clarification, you said that to get to where you are right now,
Mm-hmm.
these responsibilities, you did train as a pilot in an actual airplane?
No. So the question is, did I have any actual piloting experience before starting this? I did, but is not required. So sensor operators do not go through any kind of pilot training. Our RPA pilots do. They spend the first 2 months of their training soloing and getting to about a private pilot's license level of competency before they leave an aircraft and never get back in it again. But sensor operators on our side, we are purely tactical. Yes, sir. Yes. Yeah, so weapons school. So for those of you who don't know, who aren't Air Force guys, the Air Force has our own version of Top Gun called Air Force Weapons School. It's where we send our tactical experts to go and learn the bleeding edge of tactics, techniques, procedures, all kinds of good stuff. For officers, it's called Weapons School. On the enlisted side, for career enlisted aviators, it's called Advanced Instructor Course. We get a different patch. Officers, they get a shield version. We get a circle. But the funny thing is it's the exact same course. We are paired with a pilot, go side by side. But yes, there is an MQ-9 Advanced Instructor Course. Yes. Yes, sir. So the question is how high do we have to be out of range of surface-to-air missiles? And the answer is we're never out of range of surface-to-air missiles. There are strategic SAMs that are in theater that have a range of like 222 miles. So you just kind of deal with it. So do we have countermeasures was the question. The answer is no. The countermeasure is that there's no person on board. So, yes, sir. So the honest to God, our technique when we encounter a SAM system is turn around, fly away, and climb. So, yes.
So, I'm just trying to imagine your role as you're sitting on the side, on the right side.
Mm-hmm.
So, two scenarios. You're either the final decision maker as to whether to, I guess, detonate or
Mm-hmm.
push a button, or you're not. If you are you the final decision maker? And if you're not, is somebody else that is the final decision maker at the moment of attack actually monitoring what you're seeing, or how does that?
Okay. Yeah. So the question is who is the final decision maker when it comes to releasing terminal munitions, kinetic, we call it kinetic operations, right? So the answer is it depends, right? So it depends on the circumstances, it depends on what's happening. Typically, in the two wars that we just finished fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, we have what's called a JTAC on the ground, a Joint Terminal Attack Controller, and these are ground troops, essentially very specialized infantry that are trained on aircraft techniques, aircraft procedures, how airborne munitions work, and they will call in an airstrike, and they have to give us very specific clearance on when to attack, and there is a code word, cleared hot, and if we don't hear cleared hot, nothing's coming off the rails. Then, in the actual cockpit itself, we still have to do our due diligence that everything is correlated, we have the right target, we're comfortable with the strike. The officer, the pilot, is the final consent authority. I have no consent authority when it comes to weapons. I am just the pilot of the weapons. I guide it to the ground, but the pilot, actually, his red trigger on his joystick is what sends the munitions off the rails. That's on them. They are commissioned from the president. They have that authority. I, as an enlisted member, do not. Yeah, you're welcome. Yes. Oh, great question. So talking about my future goals, so I'm currently finishing up my bachelor's degree. From there, I plan on applying to law school, and then my goal is eventually to become a prosecutor. I miss working in law enforcement. My knees will not handle chasing down bad guys anymore. I grew like 6 inches in high school in 1 year, so it pretty much just shot all of my joints. So law school eventually, and then getting into a prosecutor's office and doing that way. So I only plan on having probably 5 more years doing this job before I move on to the next job. So yeah, thank you. Yes, sir. Yep, you're good. Go ahead.
One of the things we've all been learning about is with the Ukrainian war
Mm-hmm.
situation is the new role of drones.
Right.
Certainly for ground troops, for reconnaissance, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
A lot smaller, a lot less expensive.
Right.
What I'm wondering is, has that taught us those experiences that we're seeing going on there, changing the way we're thinking about the kind of equipment you're using, the kind of roles you're doing as well? Is that influencing that? It's certainly influenced ground
Right.
reconnaissance and so forth.
Yeah, so the question was is how is the Ukrainian conflict and small UAS systems being used there? What lessons are we taking from that? And the answer that I can give, again, we're getting into that area where I'm going to have to smile at you and move on. But the answers I can give is that our role is different. We operate more like a traditional ISR asset, a traditional CAS asset. The Army has programs. There are small UAS systems that go out with infantry units. You can Google search those, find out all about those. Yeah, the Marine Corps does. Yeah, infantry units, they have those. Even the Air Force members who deploy with those, we have those as well. So we are watching Ukraine very closely, getting all kinds of lessons that we can glean from those, and we're implementing them as our figureheads at the top of our government see fit. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yes? Mm-hmm. Do you mean like day to day, go back to the same one? So the question is, do we stay in the same drone all the time? So we are, when the aircraft land, they go into a maintenance period because they're flying for so long. They have inspections, they have to go through things like that. Typically, we'll have the same mission. We'll shift what we call AORs, areas of responsibility. It's a country. We'll shift countries every couple of months to keep things fresh. Some countries have really cool missions that are really fun to do, and other ones have really boring, dry missions. So to keep all of the crews at all the different bases fresh, we rotate through missions. So typically, when I go into work every day, I'm going to the same mission. But as far as the actual tail, the same aircraft, no, it's just a kind of a, each aircraft is configured differently with different sensors, different configurations. So whatever the mission calls for that day, the client, the customer that we're working for, lets the maintenance guys know which aircraft to give us, and then we're given an aircraft with a specific setup of some kind, depending on the mission that they plan on having us fly that day. And then your second question? Yeah, so the question is, do we only have the ability to carry missiles? No. So we can carry guided bomb units, GBU, that's what it stands for, so laser-guided munitions, and then we also can carry GPS-guided munitions. So depending on the mission set, we are certified right now to carry up to a 2,000-pound GBU. However, that significantly decreases our range. It's a lot of weight. It's a big boy. So typically, we roll our standard combat loadout is 2 Hellfire missiles, which are 250 pounds each, and then every now and then we'll throw a 500-pound bomb on just to look cool. So. Yes, sir.
You're not certified for nuclear with drones, right?
I cannot answer that question. Yes.
I just wanted to say thank you, your professionalism and your knowledge.
Thank you.
Be a lot more comfortable having these programs.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, our goal is to educate people on how these systems work, and we have a lot of checks and safety checks, and we have a lot of rules in place. And MQ-9 is not allowed to operate in U.S. airspace without a manned chase plane behind it. We have all kinds of rules. We, as public servants, we understand the trust that you're giving us to operate these systems. We understand how nervous they make some people. We have training regularly on intelligence oversight, what we're allowed to do in U.S. airspace, and our guys are top-notch guys. So thank you very much, sir. Appreciate that. Yes? How many G's am I pulling in the seat? So the answer to that question is 0.2, and that's the G's it takes for me to stand up out of my seat and go get more popcorn. So, yes.
You mentioned how much you love CAP.
Mm-hmm.
I was curious, did you ever get a taste of this early on through like search and rescue or drug interdiction?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question was about my experience with CAP and what kind of exposure to this I got. So my CAP squadron back in California, where I'm from, was on an MQ-9 base. So we got to tour the hangar and we got to see the mission. The lady who actually recruited me to the Guard after I was kind of not knowing what I was going to do, she worked at that MQ-9 unit. So I got experience there, but as far as CAP goes, I've been to search and rescue school with CAP. I've done all kinds of training there. Nothing specifically working with the MQ-9s. We do the chase mission like I was talking about, having that aircraft behind it. Civil Air Patrol does conduct that mission for certain units. The local unit here at Ellington is done by Civil Air Patrol, so anytime we're doing local operations, training and such, there's a Civil Air Patrol Cessna right behind it. So yeah, but I've done CAP for 12 years now, and I still do it as an adult to give back to our young members like this young man sitting up here in the front row. So I love it. I love CAP. Yeah. Yes, sir. Last question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So you said that your shift is 9 hours.
Yes.
Now, how many of those hours are you actually in the flight
Great question. So we have 9-hour rotations. So he's asking how many hours am I actually in the seat? So the first hour is brief admin. We have to log into our systems to make sure we're green to fly. We have all kinds of checks. You have currencies that you have to conduct once a month. And if you're red for that currency, you can't fly by yourself. You have to have an instructor over your shoulder to re-up. So the first thing you do after your brief is you have to check to make sure that currency is still green, right? So the first hour is no flying at all, ever. After that, we typically will have 2 guys on shift, and then we'll rotate. So 4 hours in the seat. We'll do 2-2, 2-2, or we'll do 3-3, 1-1. We'll break it up however we want. You can definitely ride in the seat for the whole 8 hours. When I was building hours to try to get experienced, in our career field, you're considered experienced at 550 combat hours. So when I was trucking hard for that to make sure I got that, you can tell the other guy on shift, hey, just check on me every hour. I'm going to sit in the seat. Because a lot of the guys, because we fly every day, we have some guys who have 6,000, 7,000 hours just flying combat every day, so they get kind of burnt out a little bit. So they don't mind letting us young guys take the seat for a long time, but no more than usually 4 in the day. Yeah. All right, that's my last question. Thank you so much for having me out here. I appreciate y'all. I'll be around for the rest of the day answering any questions. Thank you.